Did you ever stare at one of those magic 3D eye posters? You know, the ones that you can like see a boat in or something like that? And then you look away out into the distance and everything is wobbly and strange, just like the poster. That's how Space Funeral works. It's so odd and off-putting. It's like all the strange things were distilled into a fine wine of dark overtones, bombastic sounds, and has a rather nutty aftertaste. Space Funeral goes out of its way to be as strange as possible, and not without good reason. Every overly bloody landscape, asymmetrical creation, nonsensical being, all has a meaning to it. Well, unlike the last meaning of video I did, where everything had a coherency to it, here things stand alone for themselves very much. Every overly bloody, asymmetrical, nonsensical creation has a purpose. Although, unlike my previous video, the whole of the journey exists to emphasize a singular point at the end of the game. Please note again that this game is hard to find. If you're going to find it, you're going to have to dig through the internet for it, or you may watch the playthrough on my channel. So, why don't we take a moment and look at Space Funeral?
There is a lot to take in when starting Space Funeral, like, just so much. The colors clash, the music is off-putting, and there is a distinct death theme going on, what with all the blood and the skulls and that corpse in the corner of my room. Your father says it's time for you to leave, and that's how this all gets started. It's good luck, kid. Have a great life. Can't go home and you can't stay here. Step outside and it gets just so much worse. Houses are bleeding heads, and that's not an exaggeration. The houses are bleeding heads, and the residents are unidentifiable. Like, really, what even is that green guy? He looks like the brain that wouldn't die or something. I think that's a crow, and that's a man with an aggressively bleeding stump instead of a head. Doesn't seem to slow him down any. And is that Lucy from Peanuts? If we look at Philip, the main character, he is just a crying mess. This does not end. Even in combat, he is still going. Speaking of combat, every battle, even the last, is easy. Levels are given out constantly, and you learn many abilities, but none of it is really needed. Just kind of there to fill the status quo. Starting the actual storyline, a wizard tells us to go to the City of Forms. All things that exist in this world come from the City of Forms, but it has been corrupted, and it's too late for any of us now. Going to a nearby swamp, we have to kill a swamp trog to continue. This is where we get a good look at the kind of enemies that we're going to be fighting. Most are a mishmash of other things not well put together, or are missing parts entirely. Swamp Trog itself is a vibrant panoply of colors that you would find on a blacklight poster in the back of a Spencer's gift shop. The world outside of town is full of more grotesque imagery. Skulls, puddles of blood, trees with faces, random objects. It's like when you were a kid, you dumped your Legos everywhere and all the parts got mixed together, and then you just said it was done. But there is none more foul, more confusing, more made of disembodied legs than the leg horse. This abomination against the senses is our traveling companion who demands that we come with him. What do you say to a tangled amalgamation of flesh and sinews? Nothing. That's what. For once, I'm very grateful to have a silent protagonist. Our five-legged friend, maybe, is on his way to the Blood Cavern. You need to take a boat to get to the Blood Cavern. While on the boat, Leghorse points out a glitch floating down the river. It's an error, a form that didn't quite make the transition of the great disaster that left the world in this state. There is no way of knowing what form that error might have been before the great disaster. Now it's just broken. This world seems to have gone through a great and cataclysmic change, and is very unstable. The Blood Cavern don't pull no punches. It's got a lot of blood, all right, so much that it turns the screen red. The disturbing words you hear in the background is a song called Spleen by Ruth White. Spleen. I like that word. The sound of which combined with the atmosphere is completely unnerving. Book it past to the wizard at the end of the tunnel and put an end to this nightmare. The wizard does little more than send you onward to the City of Forms. From here on, there is very little in the way of story, just more weird as Philip makes his way to the City of Forms. So in no particular order, here are the events of Space Funeral. Fight Bloodfeast Island Man, catch a steak, fight the mob boss, throw Bibles at the mob boss, find a genie and wish for happiness, get turned into a fish, get better, meet lions, fight and possibly kill the lead singer of the band T-Rex, meet Dracula, and arrive at your destination. Okay, so it's here at the glitched out City of Forms that this story comes together. The world here is even further corrupted than the rest of it was. The last room has all the characters lined up on display as if they were just stock footage to be reused. The only living thing here is a creature called Moon. Moon came to the City of Forms in search of perfection, and having found it, perfection destroyed him. All other things were a pale imitation of the perfection that Moon had found. Even Moon was a gross and grotesque monster compared to the perfection. Moon decided that the only thing left to do was to destroy perfection, that in having perfection, all of creation would stagnate. This is the idea that true perfection would mean an end to progress, since there would be no more room for it. Other creative works, like the science fiction show The Twilight Zone, has explored the idea of perfection. 2 episodes in particular come to mind. The Trade-Ins, in which an elderly couple speak to each other about trading in their old and worn-out bodies for perfect robotic ones, and decide that it's better to be together to the end, even if it means being old. And number 12 looks just like you. In this episode, at the age of 19, you must choose one of several bodies to take the form of. This allows society to stay beautiful and conform to one another. So this brings in several questions. Is perfection boring? Is it something to be feared? And what is perfection anyway? Moon also states that it's possible that this great change has happened many times before, possibly even caused by yourself and others, that through permutations of chaos, the world will never again fear perfection. The law of entropy states that the more times that you repeat an action, the greater the chance of it to move from order to chaos. The scariest part of this game comes just after the final boss. Stepping outside shows us what the perfect world was. It's the default sprite and chipset for RPG Maker 2003. When I first saw this, I practically swallowed my tongue. I had destroyed a beautiful and unique world and replaced it with generic trash. It speaks volumes with no words at all, and in just seconds to express what I felt was loss, a great loss. The base toolkit for RPG Maker is what would be considered the standard fantasy fare experience. Knights, dragons, the castle, probably a quest to save the princess. It's been done to death with very little deviation in the way of change. But why is that?
I feel like Tolkien is largely to blame, setting down a complete template for what a fantasy world should be and having so many love it that it created a standard for the fantasy genre. His world became the basis for other creations and other creators who also endeavored to be like him and like his Lord of the Rings. This was further engraved into society's mind when Gary Gygax created Dungeons & Dragons and TSR back in the 1980s and used the same high fantasy ideology that was created by Tolkien in his Dungeons & Dragons setting, ensuring what his players, what their world would be when they played his game. Years later, it's hard to imagine a fantasy world without elves or dwarves or magic potions or some princess to rescue, frankly. Space Funeral was an attempt to run as far from the idea of perfection as possible and left us with a question of what chaos could bring and has brought into our life. I, for one, am grateful for having the question brought to me of what chaos could bring into life. I'm the Book of Cosmos. Thank you for joining me.